The dust-laden wind carried the whispers across Willow Creek like a death sentence. "She's a burden no man could carry," they said of Nora O'Malley, as if her very presence was a curse upon the parched Arizona territory of 1878. Those who didn't know her believed the stories that she brought misfortune, that she was damaged beyond repair, but Preston Reed saw something different the moment her emerald eyes met his across the crowded saloon. The late afternoon sun slanted through the grimy windows of the Rusty Nail, illuminating dust motes and cigarette smoke in golden beams. Nora sat alone at a corner table, nursing a glass of water while the piano player hammered out a jaunty tune that clashed with the heaviness in her heart. 3 months in Willow Creek had taught her that small towns had long memories and unforgiving tongues. "Mind if I join you, madam?" The voice was deep, colored with a slight Texas drawl. Nora looked up, her guard instantly raised. Before her stood a tall man, his broad shoulders blocking the light. His face was weathered from years under the sun, but his blue eyes were kind beneath the brim of his worn Stetson. She recognized him as one of the cowboys from the Diamond R Ranch outside town. "Suit yourself," she replied, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "Though you might want to reconsider, town folk don't take kindly to those who associate with me." Preston Reed settled his lean frame into the chair, a half-smile playing on his lips. "Never much cared what town folk think, Miss O'Malley, Nora O'Malley, Preston Reed." He extended a calloused hand, which she hesitantly took. "Foreman at the Diamond R." She withdrew her hand quickly. "I know who you are, Mr. Reed, just as I'm sure you've heard all about me." His smile faltered slightly. "I've heard things. Don't put much stock in gossip, though." Nora laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Is that so? Then you must be new to Willow Creek, born and raised just outside of town, actually." He leaned back, studying her. "Left for a spell after the war, came back 3 years ago." The saloon doors swung open and Sheriff Donovan entered, his eyes immediately finding Nora, his lips curled into a sneer. "Trouble?" Preston asked quietly, noting her sudden tension. "Nothing I can't handle," she replied, though her knuckles whitened around her glass. Sheriff Donovan approached their table, thumbs hooked in his belt loops. "Reed, didn't expect to see you keeping such questionable company." Preston didn't stand. "Something I can help you with, Sheriff?" "Just making my rounds." Donovan's gaze shifted to Nora, making sure certain elements don't cause any disturbances. "I'm having a quiet drink, Sheriff," Nora said evenly, "as is my right." Donovan's jaw tightened. "Your rights in this town are what I say they are, Miss O'Malley." "Don't forget that." Preston's voice remained calm, but Nora detected a dangerous edge. "Seems to me the lady isn't breaking any laws." "Not yet," Donovan muttered, then louder, "Just keep it that way." He tipped his hat mockingly before continuing to the bar. "Charming fellow," Preston commented when the sheriff was out of earshot. "He has his reasons," Nora said cryptically. "Care to enlighten me?" Nora met his gaze directly. "Mr. Reed, I appreciate the gesture, but you don't want to get involved with me." "Everyone in this town will tell you I'm nothing but trouble." "And what would you tell me?" The unexpected question caught her off guard. For a moment, the carefully constructed walls around her heart wavered. "I'd tell you they're right," she finally said, standing abruptly. "Good day, Mr. Reed." Preston watched her leave, the straight line of her back betraying no weakness despite the weight she carried. It was only after the batwing doors swung shut behind her that he noticed she'd left something on the table, a small, worn leather-bound book. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. There was no name inscribed, no indication of ownership beyond a pressed wildflower marking a page. Preston tucked it inside his vest. He'd have a reason to call on Miss O'Malley again. Outside, Nora hurried down the boardwalk, pulling her shawl tighter against the cooling evening air. She'd come to Willow Creek hoping for anonymity, a fresh start far from the shadows of her past. Instead, she'd found only suspicion and judgment. She rented a small room above the millinery shop, the only place that would have her after what happened with the Tanner family. Mrs. Weber, the German widow who owned the shop, had her own history with town gossip and offered Nora shelter when others turned her away. "You are back early," Mrs. Weber observed as Nora entered the shop. The older woman's hands never stopped moving, stitching a ribbon onto a straw bonnet. "The usual warm welcome at the saloon," Nora replied, attempting a smile. Mrs. Weber clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "These people, they have nothing better to do than talk. Tomorrow will be better, yeah." "Perhaps," Nora said, though she didn't believe it. Tomorrow would be like today, and the day after that a constant struggle against the whispers and sidelong glances. "A gentleman came looking for you earlier," Mrs. Weber mentioned casually. "Very polite, said he might have worked for you at his ranch." Nora stiffened. "Did he give a name?" "Mr. Sullivan from the Crooked S." A chill ran down Nora's spine. Patrick Sullivan was the last person she wanted to see. "If he returns, please tell him I'm not interested." Mrs. Weber looked up, concern crossing her weathered features. "Is there trouble, Nora?" "No," she lied. "I just prefer to find my own opportunities." Upstairs in her modest room, Nora lit the oil lamp and sank onto the edge of her bed. She reached automatically for the inner pocket of her dress, then froze. Her journal was gone. Panic surged through her. That journal contained everything, her deepest thoughts, secrets that could destroy what little life she'd managed to build. She mentally retraced her steps. The saloon. It had to be at the saloon, or worse, in the hands of Preston Reed. Miles away at the Diamond R Ranch, Preston sat alone on the porch of his small cabin, the leather-bound journal unopened on his lap. The ethical thing would be to return it without reading a word. But something about Nora O'Malley nagged at him, the sadness behind her defiance, the whispers that followed her like shadows. The ranch hands had warned him when they saw him talking to her in town. "That O'Malley woman is poison," Hank Miller had said. "They run her out of 3 towns before she landed here. Bad luck follows her like buzzards trail dying cattle." Preston had dismissed their warnings. He'd seen something in her eyes that spoke not of danger but of pain. With a sigh, he stood and placed the journal on the small table inside his cabin without opening it. Tomorrow, he'd return it and perhaps learn the truth behind the whispers. Morning arrived with a blaze of orange and gold across the horizon. Preston saddled his horse before dawn, the journal secured inside his saddlebag. He had ranch business in town anyway. They needed supplies, and he had to speak with the banker about a loan for new breeding stock. Willow Creek was already stirring when he arrived. Merchants opened their shops, the blacksmith's hammer rang out, and the scent of fresh bread wafted from the bakery. Preston tied his horse outside the general store but paused when he spotted Nora emerging from the millinery shop. She wore a simple blue dress, her auburn hair pulled back in a practical knot. Even from a distance, he could see the tension in her posture as she navigated the sidewalk, keeping her eyes downcast to avoid meeting anyone's gaze. "Miss O'Malley," he called, crossing the street toward her. She turned, her expression shifting from surprise to alarm when she recognized him. Her eyes darted to his saddlebag, Mr. Reed. Her voice was controlled, but her hands fidgeted with the small basket she carried. "I believe you left something behind yesterday." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew the journal. Relief flooded her features as she took it, clutching it tightly against her chest. "Thank you," she said, genuine gratitude warming her voice. "I was coming to the saloon to look for it. No need," he smiled. "I didn't read it," he added when she remained tense. Some of the wariness left her eyes. "Thank you for that as well." An awkward silence stretched between them until Preston cleared his throat. "I'm in town for supplies. Perhaps you join me for breakfast at the hotel. They make decent flapjacks." Nora glanced around, noting the curious stares of passers-by. "Mr. Reed, while I appreciate the gesture, being seen with me won't do your reputation any favors." "I reckon my reputation can handle it," he replied with a slight smile. "Besides, I'm curious about the woman everyone seems so afraid of. And if I told you they have good reason to be," he studied her, noting the challenge in her gaze, "I'd say I'm even more intrigued." A flash of amusement crossed her face before she schooled her expression. "Very well, Mr. Reed. One breakfast, though don't say I didn't warn you." The hotel dining room fell silent when they entered together. The waiter hesitated before reluctantly showing them to a table by the window. Preston noticed how Nora positioned herself with her back to the wall, her eyes constantly scanning the room. You're always watching, he observed after they ordered. Always alert. Habit, she replied simply. She stirred her coffee slowly. Mr. Reed, Preston, he corrected. Preston, she conceded. Why are you doing this? He considered the question. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. Maybe I don't like seeing someone judged without cause. You assume there's no cause. Is there? Nora's green eyes met his, searching for something. 3 people died in a fire in Hartford, Connecticut 5 years ago. The rumors say I started it. Preston kept his expression neutral. Did you? No, the word was firm, unwavering, but I couldn't save them either. And that's why you're the burden no man could carry, her laugh was bitter. One of many reasons. Their breakfast arrived, momentarily halting the conversation. Preston watched as Nora carefully cut her flapjacks into precise pieces, a methodical process that seemed to calm her. The Diamond R needs a cook, he said suddenly. Our previous one left last month for California Gold Country. Nora's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Are you offering me a job if you can cook better than Hank, which isn't saying much? You don't know anything about me. I know you need work and we need someone who can make food that doesn't taste like saddle leather. He leaned forward. It's 10 miles outside of town, might give you some peace from all this. He gestured vaguely at the dining room where people still stole glances at them. Nora set down her fork. Your ranch hands won't want me there. They'll want decent meals more than they'll care who's cooking them, Preston countered, and they answer to me. She studied him, clearly trying to decipher his motives. Why would you stick your neck out for a stranger? Preston considered his answer carefully. My father taught me to judge people by their actions, not rumors. So far, all I've seen is a woman trying to live her life despite this town's best efforts to make it impossible. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. Preston's expression softened with memory. Died defending this ranch during the war. Nora was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry for your loss. It was a long time ago, he straightened. So the job, room and board plus $20 a month. 25, she countered, a spark of something like her true self showing through. Preston smiled. 23 and you get Sundays off. Done. She extended her hand and they shook on it. As they left the hotel, Sheriff Donovan approached from across the street, his expression thunderous. Read a word. Preston stopped, positioning himself slightly in front of Nora. Sheriff, Donovan glanced between them, contempt evident on his face. Heard you're offering jobs to undesirables now. I hire based on skill, not gossip, Preston replied evenly. You're making a mistake, Reed. That woman's poison. Donovan's voice dropped. Ask her about the Tanner boy. Ask her why his parents won't let him out of their sight since she came to town. Nora stepped forward, her voice tight. I saved Tommy Tanner's life, Sheriff, though you and his father seem determined to twist that truth. Donovan sneered. That's not how Harold tells it. Harold Tanner was too drunk to notice his son wandering toward the creek, Nora shot back. If I hadn't pulled him out, the boy would have drowned. And if you hadn't been lurking around the creek in the first place, that's enough, Preston interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. Miss O'Malley works for me now, Sheriff. Any concerns about her can come directly to me. Donovan's face reddened. You'll regret this, Reed. Mark my words. As the sheriff stalked away, Preston turned to Nora. Is that true about the Tanner boy? She nodded, her expression grim. Harold Tanner couldn't admit he'd been neglectful. Easier to blame the stranger. Preston shook his head in disgust. Gather your things. We'll leave within the hour. You still want me to come after that, more than ever, he said firmly. Meet me at the general store when you're ready. An hour later, Nora sat beside Preston on the wagon seat, her few possessions packed in a trunk in the back. Mrs. Weber had hugged her goodbye, extracting a promise of visits when she came to town for supplies. As the wagon rolled away from Willow Creek, Nora felt something loosen in her chest, a tightness she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. Beside her, Preston handled the reins with quiet confidence, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing stories about the area. That ridge there, he said, gesturing to a rocky outcropping, was where my father built our first cabin when he settled here in '42. Before Arizona was even a territory. What brought him here? Nora asked, genuinely curious. Land and liberty, he always said. He was a restless spirit, traveled all the way from Pennsylvania looking for a place that felt right. Preston smiled at the memory. Claimed he knew this was home the moment he saw the sun set behind those mountains. And your mother followed a year later with a wagon train. They'd been sweethearts back east. His expression softened. She passed when I was 15. Fever took her. I'm sorry, Nora said quietly. It must have been difficult, Preston nodded. It was, but my father and I had each other. He glanced at her. What about your family? Nora hesitated, then decided that if she was to live and work with these people, some truth was necessary. My parents died in Ireland during the famine. I came to America with my older brother when I was 12 in '61. The height of the war, Preston observed. Yes. My brother Patrick joined the Union Army almost immediately, died at Gettysburg. She spoke matter-of-factly, though the old pain still lingered. I was taken in by a family in New York, worked as their maid until I was 18. And then I decided to make my own way. She turned to look at the passing landscape, effectively ending that line of conversation. Preston didn't press. They rode in comfortable silence until the Diamond R came into view, a sprawling ranch with a main house, bunkhouse, several outbuildings, and corrals filled with horses and cattle. It's larger than I expected, Nora remarked, taking in the well-maintained buildings. My father started with 20 acres and a dream, Preston said proudly. Now we're up to 2,000 acres and 400 head of cattle. As they approached, several cowboys paused in their work to watch. Nora felt their curious stares but kept her chin high. She'd faced worse than cowboys' suspicion. Preston stopped the wagon in front of a small cabin set slightly apart from the main house. This will be yours, he said, jumping down and coming around to offer her his hand. It's not much, but it's private. The cabin was simple but clean, one room with a bed, a small table with 2 chairs, a chest of drawers, and a pot-bellied stove. A curtained-off area in the corner contained a washstand. The cookhouse is there, Preston pointed to a long, low building. You'll find it fully stocked. The men eat breakfast at sunrise, dinner at noon, and supper at sundown. How many am I cooking for? 8 hands currently, plus me and my foreman, Nathan Clark. Nora nodded, mentally calculating quantities. I'll need to see what supplies you have before I plan meals. Of course. Preston shifted, suddenly seeming uncertain. I'll have the boys bring your trunk. You can settle in today, start tomorrow morning. That would be fine. Thank you, Mr. Reed. Preston, he reminded her with a small smile. If we're going to be working together, might as well use first names. After he left, Nora sat on the edge of the bed, running her hand over the clean quilt. For the first time in months, she felt something like hope. The Diamond R might be just the fresh start she needed. That evening, a knock at her door revealed a tall, weathered man with graying hair and a no-nonsense expression. Nathan Clark, he introduced himself brusquely. Foreman, Nora O'Malley, she replied, meeting his evaluating gaze steadily. Preston says you're our new cook. There was clear skepticism in his tone. That's right. Clark crossed his arms. We run a tight operation here, Miss O'Malley, no room for distractions. Nora understood his meaning perfectly. I assure you, Mr. Clark, I'm here to cook, nothing more. He seemed to accept this, giving a curt nod. Breakfast at 5, men work hard, they expect to eat well, they won't be disappointed. After he left, Nora made her way to the cookhouse to inventory supplies. The large room contained a massive cast iron stove, long tables with benches, and well-stocked shelves. Whoever had designed it knew the importance of feeding hungry men efficiently. She was examining the pantry when she heard the door open. Turning, she found Preston watching her with an amused expression. Finding everything all right? He asked. Yes, though whoever ordered supplies had peculiar priorities. 5 pounds of peppercorns, but barely any salt, Preston laughed. Hank had unusual tastes. The men mostly learned to fend for themselves these past few weeks. Well, that explains the sorry state of these pots, Nora observed, holding up a badly scorched skillet. Can you work with what's here until our next supply run? I can make do, she assured him. I've worked with less. He nodded, then hesitated. I wanted to make sure Clark didn't give you too hard a time. Nothing I couldn't handle, she replied, touched by his concern. He's protective of the ranch, I respect that. He's been with us since before the war, Preston explained. More family than employee at this point. You're fortunate to have such loyalty. I know, he watched as she continued her inventory. You don't have to start until tomorrow, you know. I prefer to be prepared, Nora said simply. First impressions matter, especially when you're already at a disadvantage, Preston's expression sobered. The men will judge you on your cooking, not rumors. I hope you're right, she said, though her tone suggested she expected otherwise. The next morning, Nora rose well before dawn. By the time the ranch hands began filtering into the cookhouse, she had coffee brewing, sourdough biscuits baking, and thick slices of salt pork sizzling in skillets. A large pot of creamy grits bubbled on the back of the stove, and she was whisking eggs for scrambling. The men entered cautiously, as if expecting to find the kitchen in flames. Instead, they were greeted by the aroma of good food and the sight of a composed woman efficiently managing multiple dishes at once. Coffee's hot, she said without looking up from her work. Help yourselves. They exchanged glances but moved toward the large pot, filling their cups. Preston and Clark arrived last, Preston's eyes widening appreciatively as he took in the spread. Looks like we made a good hire, he commented to Clark, who merely grunted in response, though his expression softened slightly at the sight of fresh biscuits. Nora served the food with quiet efficiency, noting how the conversation halted whenever she approached the table. She'd expected this and remained professional, neither engaging nor withdrawing completely. When Preston finished his meal, he caught her eye and nodded approvingly. Best breakfast we've had in months, Miss O'Malley. A chorus of reluctant agreement followed from the men. It wasn't acceptance yet, but it was a start. The days fell into a rhythm. Nora rose early to prepare breakfast, spent the mornings baking bread and preparing dinner, served the midday meal, then had a few hours to herself before starting supper preparations. The work was hard but satisfying, and she found comfort in the routine. The ranch hands warmed to her gradually, won over by her cooking and her no-nonsense attitude. By the end of her first week, they'd progressed from wary silence to cautious conversation. By the second week, they were leaving their hats outside the cookhouse door and thanking her for meals. Only Clark remained reserved, though his initial hostility had faded to a watchful neutrality. Nora understood he was protective of Preston and the ranch. She respected his caution even as she worked to prove herself trustworthy. Preston himself was a revelation. He treated her with unfailing respect, stopping by the cookhouse several times daily with requests that sounded suspiciously like excuses to check on her. She found herself looking forward to these brief encounters, to his easy smile and genuine interest in her thoughts. It was dangerous to feel this way, she knew. Men like Preston Reed, honorable men with responsibilities and reputations, didn't entangle themselves with women like her. Women with secrets, women who carried the kind of burden she did. Still, she couldn't help the warmth that spread through her chest when he arrived at the cookhouse one evening after the men had finished eating. "Everything all right?" she asked, hands busy kneading dough for the next day's bread. "Fine," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Just wondering if you might join me for a ride tomorrow afternoon." Her hands stilled. "A ride? There's a part of the property I'd like to show you. Thought you might enjoy getting away from the cookhouse for a few hours." When she hesitated, he added, "Consider it part of your duties. Can't have our cook getting cabin fever." Nora smiled despite herself. "Is that an order, Mr. Reed?" "More of a strong suggestion," he replied, his blue eyes twinkling. "Say, after dinner cleanup." "All right," she agreed, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach. "After cleanup." The next day dawned clear and warm. Nora prepared a hearty beef stew for dinner, leaving it to simmer while she served the men. They ate with their usual enthusiasm, complimenting her on the tender meat and flavorful broth. After the meal, as she was washing the last of the dishes, Preston appeared with 2 horses already saddled. "Ready for that ride?" he asked. Nora dried her hands on her apron, suddenly nervous. "I should change first." "No need," he assured her. We're not going far and no one's around to care if you're in a work dress. She removed her apron and followed him outside. The horse he'd brought for her was a gentle-looking mare with a dappled coat. "This is Daisy," Preston said, patting the mare's neck. "Sweetest horse on the ranch, she'll take good care of you." "It's been a while since I've ridden," Nora admitted, approaching the horse cautiously. "Like swimming," Preston replied, offering his cupped hands to help her mount. "You never really forget." The feel of his hands at her waist as he steadied her in the saddle sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with fear of falling. Once she was settled, he swung easily onto his own mount, a tall bay gelding. They rode at a leisurely pace, Preston pointing out features of the ranch, the creek that provided water year-round, the best grazing lands, the boundary line marked by a distant fence. Nora found herself relaxing, enjoying the gentle motion of the horse beneath her and the beautiful landscape around them. "You look natural in the saddle," Preston observed, "for someone who hasn't ridden in a while." "My brother taught me when we first came west," she explained. "Said a woman should know how to ride if she wanted to survive out here. Your brother sounds like a wise man." "He was," she said softly, memories of Patrick flooding back, his infectious laugh, his protective nature, his determination to build a better life for them both. They crested a small hill and Preston reined in his horse. Before them stretched a verdant valley, bisected by a stream that glittered in the afternoon sun. Wildflowers dotted the grass in splashes of purple and yellow. "It's beautiful," Nora breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. "My father called it Eden Valley," Preston said, dismounting. "It's my favorite place on the ranch." He helped her down from Daisy, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Nora felt her cheeks warm but didn't pull away. "Thank you for showing me this," she said, looking up at him. "I wanted to share it with someone who would appreciate it," he replied, his voice softer than usual. They stood close, the horses grazing nearby, the only sounds the rustling of grass in the breeze and the distant call of a hawk. Nora was acutely aware of Preston's presence, the clean scent of him, the warmth radiating from his body, the way his eyes never left her face. "Nora," he said, her name like a question on his lips. Whatever he might have said next was interrupted by the pounding of approaching hooves. They turned to see Clark riding hard toward them, his expression grim. "Preston," he called as he approached. "Trouble, Sullivan's men cut the north fence line. They're driving their cattle onto our grazing land." Preston's expression hardened instantly. How many men? At least 5, all armed. "Damn," Preston turned to Nora. "I need to handle this. Can you make it back to the ranch house alone?" "Of course," she said, concern evident in her voice. "Be careful." His expression softened momentarily. "I will stay inside until I return." Clark was watching them with a knowing look that made Nora uncomfortable. As Preston helped her remount, Clark cleared his throat. "Miss O'Malley," he said, his usual gruffness tinged with reluctance. "You might want to know Sullivan was asking about you in town yesterday." Nora's blood ran cold. "Patrick Sullivan," Clark nodded, "said he had unfinished business with you." Preston looked between them sharply. "You know Sullivan, we've met," Nora said, her voice tight. "It didn't end well." "We'll discuss this later," Preston decided, concern evident in his expression. "For now, get back to the ranch. Stay in your cabin with the door locked until I return." As she rode back alone, Nora's mind raced. Patrick Sullivan had found her again. The peaceful existence she'd begun to build at the Diamond R was in jeopardy. In her cabin, she paced anxiously, debating what to do. The smart choice would be to leave immediately, to spare Preston and his ranch the trouble that followed her. Yet the thought of leaving, of never seeing Preston again, caused an ache in her chest she couldn't ignore. Hours passed with no sign of Preston's return. Night fell, and still Nora waited, alternating between the window and the door, straining to hear approaching riders. Finally, well past midnight, she heard hoofbeats. Peering through the window, she saw Preston dismounting wearily from his horse. Without thinking, she rushed outside. "Preston," she called softly. He turned, his face illuminated by the moonlight. There was a cut above his right eye, and he held himself stiffly as if nursing bruised ribs. "You're hurt," she said, hurrying to his side. "It's nothing," he assured her, though he winced when she touched his arm. Sullivan's men were looking for a fight. We obliged them. Did you? She couldn't finish the question. No one's dead, if that's what you're asking, he said grimly. But they won't be cutting our fences again anytime soon. She led him to her cabin, ignoring his weak protests. Sit, she ordered, gesturing to a chair. Let me clean that cut, he complied, watching silently as she gathered a basin of water and clean cloths. As she gently dabbed at the wound, he caught her wrist. How do you know Sullivan? He asked directly. Nora sighed, setting down the cloth. He owned the saloon in the last town I lived in, made certain advances. When I refused him, he made sure everyone in town believed I was morally corrupt. Preston's jaw tightened. That fits with what I know of the man. There's more, she admitted reluctantly. He threatened me when I left, said I'd regret humiliating him. Is that why you came to Willow Creek? She nodded. I thought I'd traveled far enough to escape his influence. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because everyone has secrets, Preston, she said softly, and mine have a way of hurting those around me. His eyes searched hers. I'm not easily hurt, Nora. The tenderness in his voice nearly undid her. You should go, she whispered. The men will talk if you stay in my cabin. Let them talk, he replied, but he stood nonetheless. At the door, he turned back. Sullivan won't touch you, I promise you that. After he left, Nora sat awake for a long time, her thoughts in turmoil. She'd spent years keeping people at arm's length, protecting herself from the pain of loss, from the consequences of her past. Now Preston Reed was threatening to breach all her carefully constructed defenses, and she wasn't sure she had the strength to stop him, or if she even wanted to. The next morning, Nora went about her duties as usual, though her mind was elsewhere. The ranch hand seemed subdued, several sporting bruises and cuts from the previous night's confrontation. Clark watched her with a new wariness that made her uneasy. Preston didn't appear for breakfast. When she asked after him, Clark informed her tersely that he'd ridden into town at first light. Town, she repeated, anxiety spiking. Why, ranch business, Clark replied, though his expression suggested he knew more than he was saying. By midday, Nora was so distracted she nearly burned the cornbread. The men had just sat down to eat when the sound of multiple horses approaching drew everyone's attention. Clark moved to the window, his hand instinctively moving to the gun at his hip. Sullivan, he growled. Nora's heart raced as she joined him at the window. Sure enough, Patrick Sullivan sat astride a black stallion, 5 armed men behind him. But it was the figure riding alongside Sullivan that made her gasp. Preston, his hands bound, a darkening bruise on his jaw. Stay inside, Clark ordered, already moving toward the door. Boys, with me. The ranch hands followed him out, leaving Nora alone in the cookhouse. Through the window, she watched as Sullivan dismounted, dragging Preston roughly from his horse. Reed here thought he could threaten me, Sullivan called out, his voice carrying clearly. Rode into my saloon making demands. Seems he needs a lesson in respect. Clark stood his ground, the ranch hands spreading out behind him. Let him go, Sullivan. This is between you and Reed. Sullivan laughed, a harsh sound that sent chills down Nora's spine. Not anymore, it isn't. I want what's mine. Nothing here belongs to you, Clark retorted. The woman does, Sullivan snarled. Nora O'Malley, send her out and maybe I'll let Reed live. Nora felt sick. Preston had gone to confront Sullivan about her to protect her, and now he was paying the price for her past. She couldn't let that happen. Before she could reconsider, Nora pushed open the cookhouse door and stepped outside. The bright sunlight momentarily blinded her, but she moved forward steadily. I'm here, Patrick, she called, her voice stronger than she felt. All eyes turned to her. Preston struggled against his bonds, shaking his head violently. Nora, no, he shouted. Get back inside. Sullivan's face split in a triumphant grin. There she is, the woman who thinks she can make a fool of me. Nora walked forward until she stood beside Clark. Let Preston go. This is between you and me. Nora, don't, Preston pleaded, earning himself a backhanded slap from Sullivan. Shut up, Sullivan growled before turning back to Nora. You've led me on quite a chase, my dear, 3 towns and nearly a year to find you. What do you want, Patrick? Nora asked, though she knew the answer. You know what I want, he replied, his eyes cold. You humiliated me. No woman does that without consequences. If you're looking for an apology, you won't get one, she said evenly. I did nothing wrong. Sullivan's face darkened. You'll come with me now, or I'll put a bullet in Reed's head and burn this ranch to the ground. Nora felt Clark tense beside her. The ranch hands had spread out, hands hovering near their weapons. A standoff was brewing, and people would die. Preston would die if she didn't act. If I come with you, she said carefully, you'll leave the Diamond R and everyone on it alone. No. Preston shouted, struggling harder against his bonds. Nora, don't do this, Sullivan smiled, his expression predatory. You have my word. Nora knew his word meant nothing, but she had no choice. She couldn't be responsible for more deaths, more suffering, not again. Let Preston go first, she demanded. Untie him and let him walk to his men, then I'll come with you. Sullivan considered this, then nodded to one of his men. Cut him loose. The man sliced through Preston's bonds. The moment his hands were free, Preston lunged at Sullivan, but two men grabbed him, restraining him while Sullivan landed a vicious punch to his midsection. Stop, Nora cried. I'm coming with you, just stop hurting him. The men released Preston, who doubled over, gasping for breath. As they shoved him toward Clark and the others, his eyes found Nora's, filled with a desperate plea. Don't do this, he wheezed. He'll kill you. I'll be fine, she lied, forcing a smile. Take care of the ranch. As she walked toward Sullivan, Clark grabbed Preston's arm, preventing him from following. Sullivan reached down, extending his hand to pull her up behind him on his horse. The moment her hand touched his, a shot rang out. Sullivan jerked, his expression one of shocked surprise as a red stain blossomed on his chest. He toppled from his horse, dead before he hit the ground. Chaos erupted. Sullivan's men reached for their guns, but the ranch hands were faster. Gunfire exploded around them as Nora dropped to the ground, covering her head. Strong arms encircled her, dragging her to safety behind a water trough. Preston's voice was in her ear, urgent and fierce. Stay down, he ordered, pulling his own gun and firing over the trough. The gunfight was brief but violent. When silence finally fell, 3 of Sullivan's men lay dead, the other 2 had fled, and one of the Diamond R hands clutched a bleeding arm. Preston helped Nora to her feet, his hands gripping her shoulders as he examined her for injuries. Are you hurt? She shook her head, still dazed. Who fired the first shot? I did, Clark said, approaching with a smoking rifle. Man was fixing to kidnap a Diamond R employee. Couldn't allow that. Preston's expression was a mixture of gratitude and concern as he turned to Clark. Get Doc Harris out here for Mitch's arm, and send someone to the sheriff to report what happened. As Clark moved away to carry out these instructions, Preston turned back to Nora, his expression softening. You were going to go with him, to save me, to save the ranch. I couldn't let anyone else get hurt because of me, she said quietly. Don't you understand? His voice was rough with emotion. You're not a burden, Nora. You're the reason I keep going. The words struck her like a physical blow. What, since you came here, everything's been brighter. Better? His hands cupped her face gently. I was half alive before you arrived, just going through the motions. Now I wake up each morning looking forward to seeing you, hearing your voice, being near you. Tears filled Nora's eyes. Preston, you don't know everything about me. The fire in Hartford, I don't care, he interrupted. Whatever happened before, it doesn't change who you are now, and who you are is the woman I'm falling in love with. A sob escaped her. You can't mean that. I've never meant anything more, he assured her, his thumbs wiping away her tears. When Sullivan had me, all I could think about was getting back to you. Not the ranch, not the cattle. You. In that moment, with Gunsmoke still hanging in the air and the man who'd haunted her for nearly a year lying dead yards away, Nora made a decision. No more running. No more hiding behind walls of fear and guilt. The fire, she said, her voice steadying. I was working as a governess for the Henderson family. Mr. Henderson made advances. When I rejected him, he became angry, violent. That night, he'd been drinking heavily. He knocked over a lamp during an altercation with me. The fire spread so quickly. Preston listened silently, his gaze never leaving her face. I tried to save them, Mrs. Henderson and the children. I got the youngest out, but when I went back for the others. Her voice broke. The stairs collapsed. I couldn't reach them, Mr. Henderson blamed me, told everyone I'd started the fire deliberately. And people believed him because he was wealthy and respected, Preston concluded quietly. Nora nodded. The child I saved died 3 days later from smoke inhalation. After that, the whispers started that I was cursed. That death followed me. I left Hartford, but the rumors followed. Preston pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. It wasn't your fault, Nora. None of it was your fault. She clung to him, years of pent-up grief and guilt pouring out in wrenching sobs. He held her through it all, his solid presence anchoring her as the storm of emotions raged. When she finally quieted, he leaned back just enough to look into her eyes. "No more running," he said softly. "Stay here, stay with me. The town can think what they want," he finished firmly. "We know the truth, and in time they'll see it too." His faith in her, in them, was humbling. "I'm still afraid," she admitted, "afraid that being with me will bring you trouble." "I'm not," he replied, a smile tugging at his lips. "Besides, I've already faced down Sullivan for you." Town gossip doesn't scare me much after that. Despite everything, Nora found herself smiling back. "You are either very brave or very foolish, Preston Reed." "Both," he acknowledged, his expression turning serious again. "But mostly, I'm just a man who can't imagine his life without you in it." With that, he lowered his head and kissed her, a gentle press of lips that quickly deepened into something more powerful, more certain. Nora surrendered to him, allowing herself to believe that perhaps her burdens could be shared, that perhaps she wasn't meant to carry them alone. In the weeks that followed, life at the Diamond R settled into a new rhythm. The sheriff ruled Sullivan's death self-defense, particularly after learning about his threatening behavior in town and the kidnapping of Preston. Sullivan's remaining men left the territory, apparently deciding that revenge wasn't worth the risk. Word of what had happened spread quickly through Willow Creek. To Nora's surprise, the story that circulated wasn't one of scandal, but of heroism, how she'd been willing to sacrifice herself to save the Diamond R and its owner. Gradually, the whispers changed. When she accompanied Preston to town for supplies, she noticed fewer sidelong glances, more genuine greetings. Even Sheriff Donovan tipped his hat to her, a grudging respect in his eyes. Clark, too, had undergone a transformation. After saving her from Sullivan, he'd appointed himself her unofficial protector, scrutinizing anyone who approached her with too much interest or too little respect. "Never thought I'd see the day Nathan Clark became a gentleman," Preston remarked one evening as they sat on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset. "He's protective of what he considers family," Nora replied, her hand resting comfortably in Preston's. "I'm honored to be included in that category." Preston squeezed her hand. Speaking of family, he shifted, turning to face her fully, and Nora's heart began to race as he reached into his pocket. "I had this made in town," he said, producing a small gold ring set with a single pearl. "It was my mother's pearl, but the setting is new." Nora stared at the ring, unable to speak. "I know it's only been a few months," Preston continued, suddenly nervous, "and I'll understand if you need more time, but I love you, Nora O'Malley. I want to build a life with you right here if you'll have me." Tears welled in her eyes, but these were different from the tears she'd shed in the past, tears of grief and regret. These were tears of joy, of possibility. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I'll have you, Preston Reed." His smile was radiant as he slid the ring onto her finger. "They called you a burden no man could carry," he said softly. "But they were wrong. You're not a burden, you're a gift, the greatest gift I've ever received." As he pulled her into his arms, Nora felt the last of her old fears release their hold. Here, in this place, with this man, she had found not just safety but belonging, not just acceptance but love. The burden she'd carried for so long had become a shared strength, transforming both their lives in ways neither could have imagined when fate brought them together in a dusty saloon all those months ago. Their wedding took place the following spring, when wildflowers carpeted Eden Valley in a riot of color. The entire ranch turned out for the celebration, along with a surprising number of townspeople who had gradually come to see Nora, as Preston did, not as a harbinger of misfortune, but as a woman of remarkable courage and resilience. Mrs. Weber wept openly as Nora walked toward Preston in a simple white dress adorned with lace from the millinery shop. Clark stood proudly as Preston's best man, his usually stern face softened by genuine happiness for the couple. "I never thought I'd find this," Nora confessed to Preston that night as they lay together in what was now their shared bedroom in the main house. "After everything that happened, I'd convinced myself I didn't deserve joy." Preston traced the curve of her cheek tenderly. "Everyone deserves joy, Nora, especially those who have known great sorrow." She nestled closer to him, marveling at how natural it felt to be in his arms, to be his wife. "Do you know what Mrs. Tanner said to me at the wedding?" She apologized. Said Harold had finally admitted the truth about Tommy's accident. Preston smiled against her hair. "People can surprise you given enough time and evidence." "You surprised me," she murmured, "from that very first day in the saloon." "How so? You saw me," she said simply. "Not the rumors, not the gossip, just me." He tightened his arms around her. "And I'll keep seeing you every day for the rest of our lives." As the years passed, the Diamond R flourished under their joint care. Preston's business acumen combined with Nora's practical efficiency transformed the already successful ranch into one of the territory's most prosperous operations. A year after their wedding, Nora gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret, after Preston's mother. 2 years later came a son, Patrick, named for Nora's brother. The children grew strong and healthy, surrounded by the love of their parents and the extended family of the ranch. Clark, to everyone's astonishment, proved to be an indulgent uncle figure, teaching the children to ride almost as soon as they could walk. When he finally retired from active ranch work at 70, he remained in a cabin on the property, a permanent fixture at family dinners and celebrations. Willow Creek changed too, growing from a small frontier town into a bustling community as the territory moved toward statehood. Nora became an influential figure, establishing a school and later serving on the town council developments that would have seemed impossible during those early days when whispers followed her every move. Through it all, Preston's words on the day of Sullivan's death remained true. Nora wasn't his burden, she was his reason for continuing, for building, for dreaming bigger than he ever had before. On their 20th anniversary, they rode together to Eden Valley, now a traditional retreat for them on special occasions. The wildflowers were just as vibrant, the stream just as clear, though both of them showed the gentle weathering of time and experience. "You ever regret it?" Nora asked as they sat side by side on a blanket, watching the play of sunlight on water. "Taking a chance on the woman everyone warned you against." Preston turned to her, the lines around his eyes crinkling with his smile. "Not for a single moment," he assured her, taking her hand in his. The wedding ring still gleamed on her finger, joined now by a band that matched his own. "You were never the burden they claimed you were, Nora. You were always the strength I needed to become the man I was meant to be." She leaned against him, content in the knowledge that the whispers had long since faded, replaced by a legacy of love and respect that would outlast them both. The burden she'd once thought no man could carry had transformed into a shared journey that had enriched not just their lives, but the lives of everyone around them. In the end, that was the true miracle of their story, not that Preston had been strong enough to carry her burden, but that together they had turned it into something beautiful, something worth carrying, something that had carried them both to heights neither could have reached alone.